Ntrallazzu is the title of a cycle of works based on interactive life scores that reflects on the multifaceted philosophical concepts of liveness and interaction, both from a creative point of view and in more critical terms. The work is a 5-6 minutes piece based on a projected score that interacts in real time with the material played by the performers. In this paper, we discuss the ways in which subsequent versions of Ntrallazzu exist in between two fundamental sets of opposites, namely interactivity and interpassivity and presence and absence. In exploring these two dichotomies, Ntrallazzu dialogues with the multiple modes of liveness examined by John Croft in 2007 and situates itself in the broader rubric of ubiquitous music, as in Keller et al. 2010. So, from a critical point of view, Ntrallazzu intends to explore the implications of liveness in terms of possibilities of audience surveillance on the gestures of the performers that are not generally predicated within the concert hall situations, in terms of liveness as surveillance and as algorithmic replica. Our main theoretical reference is the work of Joseph Pugliese, 2014. Now, this paper dialogues with and furthers the findings of previous work by Messina and Lucille Aliel, 2018 and 2019. In that case, the authors drew upon phenomenology and deconstructivism in order to turn Ntrallazzu into a collaborative comprovisation experience, resulting eventually in a literal hijacking of the original piece. The pieces that composed the cycle Ntrallazzu were composed between 2013 and 2019. The first piece was written and developed between 2013 and 2014 and called for an instrument of the flute family plus one of the clarinet family. The first version of Ntrallazzu, later renamed as Ntrallazzu 1, Ntrallazzu 1, was premiered in June 2018 by the Love Music Collective. So part of what John Croft suggests is that live interaction can challenge received ontology of Western art music, where the interposition of the human body between the score and the final sound product is normally regarded as a nuisance or as an accident. Antithetically to this last point, we could add that we may produce live electronics in order to downsize and reconsider the role of human agency in the context of the final sound product. These two reasons, we argue, are both to be considered indispensable when talking about live electronics. The human body in this context is both reclaimed as a political space of self-determination and questioned as the primary, ultimate and sole locus of artistic or political agency. So another point on which Croft reflects regards the many types of live musical interaction that are possible. The type of live interaction that happens in Ntrallazzu is categorized by Croft as responsorial proliferating liveness, characterized by the fact that, I quote, its aesthetic pertinence is determined by the extent to which the response varies in a perceptible way with the noticeably accidental characteristics of the performance. Croft 2007. In the piece of the Ntrallazzu cycle, then the main parameters of the piece change dramatically depending on minimal variation of the performance. Alongside responsorial proliferating liveness as interaction, The work also features important elements of interpassivity as well. The term interpassivity was coined by Robert Fowler in the 1997 and then abundantly used by Slavoj Žižek, who described it as referring to a sense of being active through another subject that does the job for one. Now, considering Žižek's reflection on the idea of suffering on behalf of another subject, in most of the pieces that compose the Ntrallazzu cycle, a relevant interpassive relationship happens between the performance and the audience. The audience appreciates the interaction but delegates action to the performers, while also participating and possibly formulating opinions on the general dynamics of what's going on. Drawing abundantly on Žižek's thought, Federica Ruben transposes the concept of interpassivity to the realm of musical creativity. I quote, "The performer might form interpassive relationships with technology when a technological object appears to remain passive while making the performer appear frantically active." Ruben, 2011. Ntrallazzu is characterized by a similar alternation between passivity and activity that characterizes the relationship between the performers. In some moments, the score waits for an input from the performers and vice versa. The performance of Ntrallazzu 5 or Ntrallazzu 5 in João Pessoa was by far the one when this tense set of interpassive relationships was most appreciable. The simultaneous operation of two different maximum speed patches involved the presence of two live scores and the concurrent triggering of two different sets of live electronics, which happened to also interact between each other. Several tweaks were made in order to alleviate the huge disruptions that this complicated set of interactions involved. Nevertheless, during the performance, the cello part did not end when it was supposed to end. In fact, after the appearance of the end of the piece sign on the violin projection, the cello score continued to run ad infinitum. In this situation, cellist Tom Drummond perhaps interpreted Rubens' concept of interpassive music in its most literal sense. He visibly wanted the piece to end, but he continued to respond almost mechanically to the live score. This in turn created a palpable atmosphere of tension among the audience, with people distinctly wondering whether something was not working in the way it was supposed to work. Luckily, after some 4 minutes of interminable torment, the piece did end eventually. So this last anecdote might help introduce another important aspect of interaction that is intrinsic to the batch algorithm, which in turn is very simply calibrated to detect instrumental sound and discard background noise coming from the room and the audience. In this way, through simple operations of calibrations, the patch crystallizes some of the very discursive binaries that in other ways Ntrallazzu intends to challenge and question. By calibrating the patch in order not to interact with the accidental sounds produced by the audience, the piece explicitly confirms the operativity of these binaries, namely sound versus silence and instrumental sound wanted versus background noise unwanted, hence reproducing the border between performers and audience. Furthermore, the live score is triggered by sonic activity from the instruments and hence once they stop playing. Now, this is a rudimentary form of biometric detection that boils down to a recognition of the living presence of the performers, as well as a detection of their disappearance once they stop playing. Joseph Pugliese, after Derrida, calls metaphysics of presence this algorithmic reliance on detectable traits in order to ascertain the presence or absence of a human subject. As Pugliese notes, this reliance is potentially very problematic, both theoretically and practically. How can one distinguish physical presence from non-presence if the detection is based on electronic impulses that might well be simulating the two states? Is it not always already a simulation that is at stake? In this sense, how do we distinguish real simulation from fake simulation? All this, in practical terms, makes Ntrallazzu always vulnerable and somewhat unstable, a characteristic that is definitely a distinctive part of the piece. Finally, we want to situate Ntrallazzu within the ubiquitous music rubric that describes this conference. We quote Keller et al. From 2010, saying that most of the social paraphernalia that characterizes previous musical practices, so like concert halls, listen, play, listen, bow, applaud, rituals, social paraphernalia that break down in the context of ubiquitous musical practices. So while we claim that the whole of the Ntrallazzu cycle is ubiquitous music, we want also to provide the examples of the most ubiquitous pieces of the Ntrallazzu cycle. So during the conference Balance and Balance 2018 in the Netherlands, a standalone and numbered version of the piece was prepared for a constantly running installation scheduled on a different time and venue than Leonardo Feichas' performance of Ntrallazzu 3. On that occasion, the audience was able to read and perform a text-based live score from a screen based on discursive instructions. In this way, the participation in the creative process was extended to the general public, also exploring the potential of what Keller et al. And Keller et Feichas have described as creative semantic anchoring, ASC. ASC is also relevant to another text-based piece of the cycle, namely Ntrallazzu 6 or Ntrallazzu 6, where articulated sentences were meant to dialogue with the historical and philosophical premises of the cycle. In Ntrallazzu 6, the lack of interaction of the voice with any acoustic instrument was compensated by the insertion of a MIDI-out keyboard plugged to the patch. Arguably, this element further decentered the ecological balance of comprovisation away from the human being as the principal and exclusive agent of the creative process. Well, that's it for today. Thank you very much.